Junkyard Love Podcast. At what age do we learn how to have better conversations? At what age do we learn to have better conversations with ourselves?
I've forgotten in the past too, so I don't want to do that.
No, I totally know what you mean. Yeah, it's funny. If I start my morning and have zero interaction with anyone, then I start realizing it like later on the day. I'm like, wow, I haven't talked to anybody all day long. And it has a funny effect. It has a funny effect on like your own brain sometimes, you know? It's like you're very much just in your head. It's hard to get out of that and hard to like consider like, oh yeah, there's other people that like have other cares in the world that like I'm conversing with, you know? It's like interesting too, when you can tell two people have that same kind of like day or that same kind of like experience and they get together and they're both kind of like strange and internal for a little bit, and then it slowly warms up. It's like, oh yeah, we're humans. We can connect, and that's like what we inherently want to do.
You meet up with someone, you realize you're living about 6 miles deep inside your own ass, basically.
Yeah, completely.
Just disappeared into yourself. I like there's this guy. I think I might have told you about this the other day. There's this poet David White, and he has this beautiful poem. The gist is basically when we're living alone, when we're by ourselves, we're living as a question. Everything is a question. We're exploring, our truths, who we are, especially if we're listening to philosophy or practicing meditation. We're kind of unraveling and questioning everything about ourselves. But when we're living with others, we're living as a statement,
Totally.
And the difference between our two selves is like, it can be so vast. And like, I think the balance of just being a human is trying to consistently, use the accordion of when you meet up with somebody, like stop living as such a crazy question and try to live as more of a statement of those questions that you've been practicing. And I don't know, it can be, I don't know, like if someone is going into public spaces and they're continuously living as a question, you might after a while start to think they're a bit loopy.
Absolutely.
We have to have those statement moments in our lives too.
It's funny because I thought about this morning, and like part of me, like this morning, I was like, wow, I'm actually like kind of nervous. Like I've never like been on like a podcast before. It's like I was thinking about the formats. I was like, man, me and Jacob talk super openly all the time. It's like very free flowing and like very easy. And I started thinking about like exactly what you're talking about here, which is like by living as a statement. And like, I think that there's a couple things that I think about that I thought of this morning, which is living as a statement is inherent when you're like around other people. Now to do it like as a creative, like as an artist, like as yourself, like I have questions for you as far as like you're able to live as a statement even outside of yourself, even outside of interactions with others, as in like in your own internal time, you're able to live as a statement. And I guess inherently what I've always heard and what you think is like when it comes to art, when it comes to like, trying to get in touch with yourself, trying to show a side of you, a lot of it is for yourself. But it's interesting whenever you think about like how much of it is for others. I mean, to say that you have an intention to like share your art and share yourself, you're now taking that internal, that thought of a question and turning it into a statement. I was thinking this morning, like part of the reason why I am like a little nervous about getting on here is I was like, I'm not used to that. I'm not used to like sharing, I guess in a medium that is bigger than like who can actually hear me right now. You know what I mean? It's like I'm so used to a medium of like, hey, like maybe 5 people can hear me, or maybe like, some of those like old like meetings that float on, I would reach like 20 people or 25 people or something like that. That was always cool. But the thought of trying to reach more than that has never been, it's never like dawned on me. And something about that was like, ooh, that's scary, So I wonder like, how do you view your own art or your own creativity or your own living as a statement, and bigger than just like a real world? Because like the real world is in my theory, it's I'm used to like me and you and like maybe a few other people. You've actually like performed in front of audiences before. Like, how much does that change the way that you view just who you are and the way that you're sharing?
That's such a cool question. Yeah, man. I think, I mean, we talked about this before. A lot of times we think that an artist or a poet or a musician is like, like when they're in front of a microphone performing, that's when they're a musician, when they're a poet. But artist kind of has this strange arc to it because you're kind of intentionally always trying to be a poet in some ways. You're always trying to be an artist. Like how I interface with the world in my everyday life, whether I'm with people or not with people, I'd like to think that I try to bring a lens of like how it sounds so dorky really, but like how would a poet see this? Like what like how could I see this for more deeply than what the surface is kind of showing me. And I think that an artist or a poet or whatever, when we spend a lot of time, in our basements of our minds too, just like spending a ton of time as a question, like we were saying, you're like digging stuff up, you're working on yourself, you're constantly learning about yourself, you're constantly like shaving off parts of yourself, you're trying things, you're failing, you're succeeding, you're like consistently moving. Like you're not just, I'm this exact person and I play this exact video game at this exact time every day. Like it's a constant shedding, like a snake sheds skin. And then you
Oh,
go out in front of a microphone or in front of an audience, and to some extent, you're almost saying like, all right, here's what I've discovered. Like here's what I've learned about being
yeah.
a human. You know?
And like the thought of like maybe you'll see the answer to my question the same time that I see it. Like,
Yeah.
my question is, can I perform to this level in front of this amount of people? I've never done it before. Let's try something new. And everyone could be like, holy shit, we just saw it and you can't. Or like, holy shit, we just saw it and you can. And like, you both realize it at the same time. I mean, almost to the extent of like, think of like an athlete, an athlete, like the thought of trying to run like 5 miles. You've never run 5 miles before, right? You try to do your 5 miles, you make it to 4, you're like, oh shit, I'm gonna do it tomorrow. And you try for a couple of weeks or whatever, and finally you get there, you're like, wow, I ran 5 miles today. I didn't stop. I totally did it. And imagine like taking that to the level of like, I don't know, say like a marathoner, or even say I don't know, I guess even like a cyclist, like Tour de France style stuff where um you can do all that in your own head and in your own time, like not in front of people. The minute you take it and put it in front of an audience, it totally changes. Like this question is no longer, or like this living life as a question is no longer just for me. Now it's like I'm trying to answer my own questions and make a statement at the same
Mm,
time.
yeah.
It's like, I mean, that's inherently scary as hell,
Yeah.
obviously. It's like, I think that's why I have a lot of respect for artists and people like yourself in particular, because um, you are able to put something out there that is just so, it's bold, whether you want it to be or not, like it's inherently bold, you
Yeah.
know? Um,
Yeah. I mean, I think that like, we're all individuals, of course, and we have our own individual journeys, but there's also, a togetherness of we're all humans too. We're all having this experience. And I think that some people, regardless of, what capitalism has their job title as, like what they submit on their taxes, what their job title says, like a lot of us have roles as a community of humanity. And I think, like, think back, when Travis Pastrana did a backflip on a motorcycle on a dirt bike. Like, suddenly, like, he did that and it was televised, it was filmed on camera, and suddenly, bro, everyone's doing backflips. Like, he just ripped it open. So
yeah,
he gave permission to the other humans who are like, they're using that route of MX as their way of self expression, of being, of just like creating something out of nothing that wasn't there before, it hadn't been accomplished to our knowledge. Um, they're using, motocross, and the second somebody does it, other people are like, holy shit, I can do the same with the 4 minute mile. One person does it and suddenly everyone's just smashing the finish line. And now the numbers are insane for how quickly somebody can run a mile. And I think that when we're in the audience or we're observers of somebody doing their thing, their art, their poetry, their expression of what they can do. There's this thing in the audience where we're like, that, like you're doing that thing, that you're pushing the edges of, like, I'm an individual, you're an individual, but together we're human. You're pushing that thing for us. Like as much as there's a lot of ego involved, the person performing, there has to be this ego of like, you got to amp yourself up. You got to like be the person. You got to, you're putting on the captain's hat. You're playing the role for sure. But then there's also this kind of like lessening or like letting go of like, I'm doing this for me, and more of let me show you what I've learned that humans can do. And I don't know, I think everyone in the audience, there's a thing within us that feels not like a new bit of knowledge, but more of like a remembering of like oh yeah, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Like, I wonder what I could do. What's my edge, and how am I pushing it? How am I not pushing it?
Absolutely. It's funny because as you were talking about that, I started thinking, I don't have my camera. I'm not like looking at myself or whatever. I don't know what that's called, but I don't have like my self view on. Because I was like, if I don't see myself, it'll just be like that much more natural of a conversation. Because I was like, every time I've talked to Jacob, I haven't seen myself. So why would I?
Like
Yeah,
back well enough, I suppose.
yeah, exactly. You didn't bring a mirror with you that day. Your shades are not nearly shiny enough, they're just way too dull. But no, it's like I thought about that. And like, as you were speaking just now, like saying, how much an ego comes into that. I started thinking about like Mitch Hedberg and how like he would always have the sunglasses on, and he had terrible stage fright, but he still had something in him that was like, I'm a funny motherfucker. I need to get this shit out there. I just don't really want to do it. And like, I wonder, I mean, he didn't have that long of a run, right? Like, unfortunately for the entire world and for him. And like, how much does that play into it? Like, how much does like he and his desire to put his ego out there, and also like or maybe his undesire, his desire to not have his ego out there, how much did that affect like his comedy and his performance? And I wonder how much we like missed out on. I wonder how much how different it would be had that not been a thing. It's interesting to think of performers that are not, specifically in his case. I don't know if it was like a traumatic thing, or was it just that he didn't have, his ego just wasn't there to put him out there. You know what I mean? So I think like, did he have some sort of ego death or something like that? Was there some, like, we can get deep on that, but was there some reason in particular why he did not want to put himself out there?
Yeah, I mean, the ego death thing is a fun, convo in itself. Like, I think a lot of artists, a lot of performers, a lot of the big times go through some level of ego death. Like that word, that term is just instantly, it sounds so icky. It sounds so like performative in a sense. But dude, I don't know. I mean, what's that saying about the millions of ideas that are laying dormant in a graveyard, like all those people who never acted on their intuitions, on their feelings, on their dreams, on the things that they wanted to do. They're just, think about all those ideas just resting in a graveyard. I think the ones that do it, the ones that we see are the ones that they follow that intuition. They follow that like edge of, I mean, I don't know, like where does a guy like Mitch Hedberg end up if he doesn't listen to that intuition, if he doesn't get himself on stages?
How many Mitch Hedbergs are there out there right now?
Yeah. And are they screaming at passing cars at a bus stop because they've lost their minds, because they're not listening to that thing?
Totally.
It's we we love to take credit for stuff. Like, we love to, like I think that there's a way in which I didn't really choose, and I know it sounds so corny. Like, I didn't choose to be a musician. I didn't choose to be a DJ. I didn't choose to be a poet. I didn't choose to be an artist. It's like it's just like, what else am I going to do? It's like my specific experience here, my internal dialogue tells me these certain things. and then I make the decision, or I like act on them, or I don't. It's like I don't have the like my internal dialogue isn't telling me like, Jake, you got to cut hair, bro. You were born to cut hair. You were born to be a barber, and like I can't stand to walk by someone with a bad fade. I can't think of anything else. Like that's not my path. Mine is words, and like I'm kind of a terrible musician, but I like love music so much that I've just like it's all I think about. It's all I try. I'm just like continuously failing at a lot of this stuff, but it's what my internal dialogue is communicating to me. You know, it's in you know I think that in some way we're all an expression of what our internal dialogue is trying to get out of us. You know, like some people is I had the way I talk about being an artist and a poet and like I've got to do this and express myself. Some people that it's just motherhood. It's just them being a fantastic mom. And then there's other people where they might even have kids, but like they'll tell you, you know, I've never really had a calling. Like, yeah, I like being a mom, but like I didn't really have that feeling of I'm destined to be a mother. You know, we've all talked to women who have that. So I just think that it's a matter of getting in tune with what's really going on and like stepping outside of our ego for a minute to where we can almost like practice what we got to do, and then we get on a stage or in front of a mic, and that's where we're living as the statement of our ego. You know, that's where like the ego has to exist. You don't just get rid of it. You don't kill it. That's not a real thing. Your ego doesn't die. You just become aware that you have an ego, and then you observe how you're fueling it, how you're a slave to it, how it's moving you, how you can move it, how you can use it as a tool, how it uses you as a tool. You know, I think the process of being an artist of any form is a journey of self-discovery, and you'll continually shed layers of yourself. And sometimes that's on stage. Sometimes you do it in your basement and then you perform it on stage. But it's like, you know, the actualized being, the self-actualization, the dangerous word enlightenment, like an artist is, I mean, sorry, but like if they're worth any shits, they're gonna go down that path. Like I don't know how you can be an artist and never turn your attention on itself and go like, who am I and what am I doing? You know,
Absolutely.
To me that seems like it's the same thing. Like my artist journey and me expressing those are my spiritual journey, and I'm sharing it out loud.
Totally. Totally. No, it makes me question. It makes me question how much I look at like my own, um, my own ego in a way, you know, because the thought of like not wanting to be in touch with it, the thought of like wanting to be like better than it, or almost like being able to look down on your own ego and be like, oh, I'm aware of it. I can see it. I'm separate from it. I don't think being separate from it is a reality, you know, like to say that you've had like an ego death. I think that's just like the realization that like you kind of suck and like everybody else, you know, and that's not a bad thing to have. It's like you can't just run around like being 22 and invincible your entire life. Although we probably know some folks that are like that, you know, and it's like the classic phrase, like that guy's just never had his ass kicked or whatever, you know, only children out here that just act wild nonstop. Like there's probably some politics like that. But either way, it's the thought of like having so much separation from it is kind of unrealistic. The I think what I've found that I learned the most about myself and like the way that I move through life and the way that I view the world is by becoming super duper in tune like with my ego and like what my desires are and what my drives are. Why do I judge myself? Where are these judgments coming from? You know,
What did that look like? What did that look like your initial opening to that? Like when you first, like, I mean, even stumbled across the word ego, or you first kind of got into any this sort of like spiritual stuff for you personally? Like what kind of started you on that path? And I guess like just what did it look like at the beginning?
you know, I think I knew at some point that I was like just not happy. Just like I had a lot of anger issues when I was a child. You know, my dad was not a great role model when it came to like self control and anger and things like that. And so I always kind of knew that. You know, I kind of knew that I could fly off the handle really easily. And like this is talking about when I was like, you know, teens, right? And at some point, I met a girl, first love kind of thing, and she got me into like a lot of just like self-help stuff, and it's probably a combination of a bunch of things happening at once. One being like finding my way outside of like say like we'll call it like rebellion, rebelling against like the authority, which was like parents and like school and all the traditional means of this is what you have to do every day, right? And then I found my way into like work, and I found work that was gratifying in a lot of different ways. And I found that like work ethic and my hard work and just my desire to hustle, where I just wanted to make a lot of money so that I had a lot of money to spend with all my friends and on my cars and on my projects and things like that. And so I started diving deep into just going hard, finding whatever I could that would just make decent money. And I just wanted to be the best at everything that I could do. So it was a combination of that. So like finding, I guess you would call that like finding um, I guess self-love, finding self-love and finding answering those questions. You're answering those internal questions and learning about yourself and saying, "Holy shit, I'm better than I thought I was." And it's like to do that on a regular basis and become like a master of your craft, even if it's serving fucking tables or even if it's sweeping a floor. Probably the first time I ever meditated was I was a janitor at a machine shop, and we worked on like we had all these massive tools. We were working on like lathes and mills and things like that, and it had this like linoleum floor that was in like every cafeteria from like 1994 through
Yeah.
2000. Like that linoleum that was like yellow before it even got sun damaged and like mud tracked on it
I
and
can
things.
see it now. Yes.
Yeah, completely. And they're all like 12 by 12, like one foot by 1 foot tiles, right? And for whatever fucking reason, this guy set up a machine shop in a place that had that and not like a stained concrete, just like a concrete floor. And so it would, in a machine shop, you have all this like lubricating oil, like all these fluids everywhere. There's metal shavings going everywhere. Everything's dirty. Everything's always being cleaned so that it can be welded. Everything's always being cut down, and you always need the oil to do it all. The oil burns, and it turns into this almost like when you caramelize onions and your oil just burns in your pan, and it's that much harder to clean. It's kind of like that all over the place all the time. There's just shreds of metal everywhere, right? And so I got hired as a janitor there. And the reason why is because I was huge into cars. And one of the guys that worked there was also huge into cars. We were on some forum called Texas Racing Scene from like 2000, I don't know, 8 or 9 or something. It was how we'd all get together and go street racing. And that was what I was into. So this guy was like, "Hey, we're hiring. If any of you guys are just like, need some whatever job." This guy, I knew him. He had like clout on the internet because he had badass motorcycles and badass cars and shit like that. And I was like, well, I want to go hang out with this guy. Come to find out he sucked, but the guy that works in the machine shop was awesome. The guy that owned it. So long story short, I started getting into like meditating and doing a lot of breathing exercises because I was just getting so fucking baked like after everybody left, that I would everybody would leave the shop at like 3 o'clock, and I would scrub the floors. I'd scrub those little linoleum one by one tiles. And I would get super freaking high and just like scrub. And I started like I just wanted to like make it be the most efficient, like it didn't even matter how fast it went. I just wanted to like do it very effectively, right? And so I started doing like basically like a wax on, wax off. Like I had like a certain amount of counts for every tile that I scrubbed, and then I'd like move to the next one. It was like very methodical. And it was like because I was so stoned, I got really fucking into it. It was just fun. And then like I started like focusing on my breathing and thinking like, well, I better like breathe right if I'm gonna do this. I better like make sure I've got my breathing like in control so that I know exactly like how many tiles I'm gonna knock out on this row before I move to the next, and how many strokes of the scrubber, and whatever else. So that's probably like the very first time I started getting in touch with like my ego, because I started realizing that I was getting a lot from that. I was getting a lot from the work. And then I started thinking about like, I mean, I was in a relationship, so I started thinking about like my girlfriend, and like awareness around like what it means to be in love and what it means to like have all these, desires. And like I was kind of like a late bloomer, I was like 18 or 19 in my first relationship. I'd never lost my virginity before then or anything like that. And so it was kind of interesting to like be going through all these like very transformational like life changes all at the same time with the coupling of like meditation and like at the time I didn't really know it, but like I was like teaching myself breath work. And I was just kind of I was doing what I had learned in like high school band. Luckily I had like a band instructor that was huge into breathing exercises, and he taught us about like how it can help you focus, and that kind of transitioned into that janitorial job. So yeah, to answer your question, I think I first started getting into self-actualization and the ego and things like that at the age of like 19 or so, when I was scrubbing floors at a machine shop.
That's so cool, man. I was just thinking about like visualizing you scrubbing these floors. And there may not be a direct answer for this. What do you think it is? Why did you want to do a good job rather than just get the job done?
I think that is like one of those like nature versus nurture questions. It probably has a lot to do with nurture. It probably has a lot to do with just like I got a lot of work ethic from like the people around me. Both my parents were entrepreneurs. They both worked really fucking hard. All the dinner table conversations were like, my dad was an architect and my mom's a permit expediter. And like my dad got her into business, and they realized they couldn't work together, but they still were in the same business. So they were like always throwing business back and forth between each other. They always had the similar clients. And I saw my parents, we went from, at one point my mom stole, or my sister stole all my underwear and just like threw it away just as a fucking joke, which is sick. And I was like 12 or whatever. We were super fucking poor. And my mom lost it. She was like, I have no money for your underwear. Where's it at? She's screaming at me, running around. I'm like, I don't fucking know where it's at. I'm like, I don't really need it. Like, what do I need that
Like,
stuff
Mom,
for?
I'm fine. I've been wearing underwear this whole week.
She is just losing it on me. And like every day, I almost feel like it was you know what? Now that I'm remembering it, they stole a lot of it. And then once I realized how funny it was, they stole it all. So it was like it was a multifaceted approach to this. And it was really it was a dark, dark time for me. But no, it was hilarious. It was really funny. And so they stole all my shit. And so my mom, we were so poor that she couldn't buy me underwear. And so for like a month, I just didn't wear underwear. And then finally, like, I don't know if she got it at Goodwill or what, but she got like some really cheap underwear.
No, some hand-me-down undies, bro.
And
Just
I almost feel like she got me like little boy shorts and just like made me wear those or something as boxer briefs. But I guess what I'm trying to get at here is like we were really poor. And I saw us when we moved here, we moved to Austin in 1996, broke as a joke. They both just like started up shop. They didn't have income. They just had some savings. They literally moved here as like refugees from Sacramento, just like the crime in Sacramento got too bad and business dealings went the wrong way for my dad. Long story. Like basically it was just a bad place for them to be. So when they opened up shop in Austin, it was like starting from nothing with 3 kids. And like no real community. We didn't have anybody here. I still to this day don't really know why we moved to Austin. It might have just been like my dad was like, we're going there. There's money there,
Yeah.
Like very like he was born in 1935. So it's like a very like old school like way of thinking about that, right? So yeah, I watched them go from like not having money to underwear to like one day in middle school, my mom like picks me up from school in a Lexus. And I was like, what the fuck is going on
Hate it,
here?
Mom.
Yeah, it was really crazy to see. It was really, really, really crazy to see.
Were you aware of, like, when you were that age, were you aware of, the economics of things? Were you aware, like, oh, we're kind of a low income family, or we're poor? Like, did you have those dialogues within yourself at that age?
Not really. I knew that my friends had more, like
Mhm.
quite a bit. Like I knew, like we moved into like I wouldn't call it upper middle class. I wouldn't call it lower middle class. I would call it a perfectly fucking middle class neighborhood. We leased the house or rented it, whatever. And everybody else in the neighborhood bought it. We didn't know that until later on. But My buddies that I met, one of them, his dad is like a tech engineer. My other buddy, his dad was excuse me, was a president of like a Frost Bank. Both of them had like big 2-story houses. Both of them had like big SUVs or like vans they'd take on road trips and trucks. And when we moved there, we had 2 identical 1993 era Toyota Previa minivans that both had over 200,000 miles on them.
I'm
They're
so glad that
both,
you have two of the same van.
dude,
That's so
I
cool.
thought it was so weird. Like it's still so weird. Like
It
why
is a
would
weird move on your parents' end, to be
I
honest.
was that a thing? And like still to this day, like I remember they sold one of them to this lady, and like she drove it until like a few years ago, seemingly. Like probably had like 800,000 miles, like the original OG Toyota. People talk about the truck, but the minivan's where it's at. But no, so like we had these minivans, and like my dad like sold one of them and bought a Buick, and it was like an old Buick, and we called it the Roach Mobile because every time he sat in the seats, roaches were crawling. It was so bad. It was so we knew that, like, I think my sister was older than me by like 5 years. She knew that something was up, and so me and my 2 siblings kind of like caught on. You know what I mean? But we didn't realize we were like fucking broke as a joke. We were still having a great time. We had
Yeah.
buddies with more money. It was cool hanging out with them because their parents probably felt bad for us and they'd take us to Dave and Buster's. You know what I mean? So it was kind of weird. Like thinking back on it now, I'm like, wow, that's actually pretty fucking weird. But no, I mean, at the time we had no idea. We just thought it was, regular life, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. We do. It's interesting, like how our view as a child influences what we do later on in life. Like there is a storyline that your parents could have also followed of like never taking the move to Austin, never like they could have been making the exact same amount that year that they're making now. Like
Totally.
I think there's a move, you know, I mean, kind of, I'm stretching to really relate it back to what we're talking about with like ego death and stuff. I think there is a move of noticing, hey, here's the hand that I was dealt, but I'm gonna draw some more cards, or I'm gonna like get a new hand. Like I think some of us can go our whole lives just feeling like fate has handed us a certain hand of cards, and those are the only ones we can play. I think I think the statistics could probably speak for themselves. The amount of people that we kind of grow up and we end up we're in the same class economically as our parents. Like we end up making a similar like if I had poor parents, for me to grow up and suddenly be rich is like really a feat. Like I had to notice and look around and go, okay, if I do only what I was taught, or if I only play the hand I was dealt, I'm probably gonna end up in these positions. I am instead going to actively notice that, bring awareness to that, and choose to learn something new or do different things and try to route my own path. So
Absolutely.
I think that there's a little bit of that within ego death, right? Of like almost, I guess, just to really stretch the analogy of playing a new hand of cards, of like noticing, here's a path I could take, and this one's already laid out for me, and I don't have to do much to do this one, but there's this voice inside of me that really wants me to try this idea, or like go talk to that person, or there's that corporation that for whatever reason I feel like I could work there, and I'm gonna go find out who the boss is and find his email and send him an email, and I'm gonna go like try to talk to him at the Starbucks, or like there's little things where we see ourselves somewhere. We're like, I think that I can do that, even though I don't think that I was built for that. Like I didn't come out of the factory ready for this. I wasn't, the mold of my life doesn't seem to be exactly made for this, but I'm pretty sure I can do it. That right there is just like, that's what being a human is about, like seeing more for ourselves and wanting it, and actually taking steps to try those things.
Absolutely. There's something to be said about, to relate to that, there's something to be said about a phrase I heard a long time ago from like a mentor of mine was humans emerge through emergency. And it's the idea that like the motivations nowadays, I don't know if I want to go into all that or not. A whole like another realm. Nowadays, I feel like a lot of the motivations that I am currently faced with is I don't have anything that's like an emergency. I don't have anything that's like around the corner, that's going to like crush me. I don't have any responsibilities. I don't have any dependents. I don't have dogs. I don't have kids. I don't have wives, things. None of those things are pushing me to be bigger or better than I currently am. So all the motivation that I have to find in myself is either through like trauma and or like the opposite of that, right? Which is like, I feel like that's always a great motivation to say, I know this and it's terrible and it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And I never want to have that for myself again. So I'm going to do the opposite in every way to get everything besides that, right? Which I feel like that's a lot of people's motivation at the end of the day. They're motivated by the opposite of their experience, traditionally like a bad experience, right? But the other side of that is like being motivated by something that's happening to you currently that is just so, I mean, I guess it is still trauma. It's so unbearable. Like the thought of like my parents having 3 kids and not being able to like feed them and having to like ask family for money and having failing businesses in a city where everyone just wants to rob you all the time. Like at that time, Sacramento was having a really bad gang problem. A lot of Asian gangs were moving in. There's a lot of like robbery. I mean, it's like early 90s, you're talking about post LA riots and Rodney King and all that. I mean, pretty crazy time to be on the West Coast in general. And so, I mean, there's a lot going on out there. And so for them, they were motivated by we've got to do better. We've got to do something for our kids. Like we are fucked where we're at right now. And I think moving to Texas was very much like, if I had to guess, and now I'll call my mom later today and find out because I'm so curious now. But if I had to guess, it was Cedar Park is the fastest growing suburb in the country. Austin has a lot of great things going on for it. Like they saw like exactly where they wanted to be by the numbers. And I think they were just like, F it, we're going to move there. And we don't know anybody there, but we know that we can get in business there and we know that there's opportunity there. So we're going to do that. It's weird because my dad was born in 1935. You used to move around a lot for opportunity. You had to. You didn't have the internet. You didn't have you didn't have like the social interaction that we have today where like we can just apply for a job and like do something online. You can't just like create work out of nowhere. You had to go find a job or you had to go find people that were willing to pay you for what you did. And if it wasn't working where you were at, you had to fucking leave. You had to go somewhere where that.
Yeah.
And that's not an issue that we really have to deal with anymore. At least not in our society. People lately, like a lot of the movement that we've seen in the US is not because of lack of opportunity, but more of like, they just want to, you want to move out of LA and you want to move out of all of California because you want to be some people say it's a political refugee. Some people say it's because everything is too expensive. But the reality is like, you could keep your same job and go live somewhere else and have double the house for half the money and not pay state income tax. Right.
Yeah.
You want to go somewhere where you actually have like freedom to go for a hike at a park that is not overrun by people, right? You want to get out of a city that has been plagued by lockdowns and by COVID protocols, like people moving out of New York City and things like that. I mean, you've seen a lot of exoduses from things like that, but it's not so much because there's an opportunity somewhere else. It's more of like they've already found the opportunity. They just want to leave because they're getting away from they want to have more freedom, which I think is super interesting. It's interesting to see the differences there, the differences of how we used to move about the country to now. I don't know where I was going with that. I don't know how much that ties into ego there, but
No, I love it. I feel like it ties into. I mean, that's the fun thing about a podcast is it could just really like dig in and out wherever. It's so fun. I feel like podcasts always, you're like, oh, you're really over far in here, and then you bring it right back around, and everything seems.
Oh yeah, it sounds like every conversation we've had, honestly.
Yeah, no, yeah. The last good convo we had, I could edit this out if you don't want me to incriminate you, but we ate a handful of shrooms and just talked for 6 hours, and it was just a beautiful conversation.
It was rad. It was like there was so many parts of it that I was scared of, like, where's it going to go next, and then it would just pop up Like, wow, there it is.
Yeah, yeah. But dude, I mean, a lot of times if you're trying to plan things or overly structure them, you get in your own way. I mean, like we've talked about this with podcasts. I just had a meeting with someone who's starting talking about her own podcast, and she kind of asked me, like, what do you do note wise? You know, when you're interviewing someone, like, how do you know what questions to ask them? Blah blah blah. And I told her, it's like, well, so for one, for this podcast, you're my friend, and I wanted to free flow. I don't have any notes. Like, I mean, I have like these are notes that have nothing to do with this podcast. But otherwise, if it's my first or first few times meeting somebody, they just wrote a book. They sent me their book. They want me to interview them about like whatever their skill is. I'll have a page of notes, and a lot of times they're just like it's more of the act of writing the notes before the podcast or the night before that kind of help me wrap around it. But during the convo, I end up just being there with them. And like the notes are a ripcord if I need to, like, shoot, I'm drawing a blank. I can tell they're finishing their sentence. I don't know what to say. I'm gonna look at my notes, but for the most part.
Well, you never know. Like, I mean, if you've never like even conversed with someone before, so you read their book, you can read all about them. But if you've never like
Yeah.
had that one-on-one, and like obviously, like we have this screen here, like that is a whole
Yeah.
that's a whole thing that like I'm not gonna say it kills your experience by any means, but it does it definitely changes it just changes the naturalness, whatever you want to call it, like how free flowing the conversation can
Yeah.
be.
There's things that are actually there's variables that become more sensitive over Zoom. If we're sitting face to face in person, like if we're sitting out, we're at that Airbnb, there's like a beautiful river next to us. There's bugs, there's wonderful scenery. I could be talking with you and like looking around and you wouldn't for a second falter. You would just like, we're all here. But in Zoom, we could be talking and you're listening intently and suddenly I'm like looking over my shoulder or I'm like sending a text or I'm like the engagement is easier to unhook on Zoom, I've noticed. And I just try to treat that with the delicacy that it deserves.
Totally.
Sometimes it's, it comes with being the producer in everything of the podcast you're hosting. Like I can't say, hey, Jamie, pull this up or, like, hey, brighten my iris. Like I'm the one also doing that. So I'm being the one who's running the podcast as I'm the host or the performer or whatever. But, anyway, man, before I forget, I'm sorry. I like brought us off on this side quest. I was curious, how old were your parents when they had you? And I'm curious, do you think that influenced you to have a different perspective on the world? I mean, there's this corny saying of being an old soul, I'm sure you've heard that, but like, I feel like you're definitely an old soul. I feel like your perspective on things, can qualify as the old soulness. I don't know. Do you, I think you might have froze. Are you still there?
No, it seems good now. Good
Okay.
stuff.
Well,
Sweet.
I'll just reiterate the question. So
Yeah, totally.
I'm curious, what age were you, what age were your parents when they had you? And then I guess like, how do you think that kind of affected your life? I mean, you probably growing up, the kids your age probably had different aged parents than you did, right?
Totally. Yeah, totally. And yeah, to say you mentioned you kind of consider me like an old soul, and I've always felt more comfortable around older folks anyway. Like I have a bunch of half siblings. I think I'm one of 10 siblings. And so I've got two blood siblings, like full blooded or whatever.
Right, these are my
And,
blood siblings.
my two sisters, who I've got, yeah. And but then I've got what is that, three? And then I've got seven other siblings. And so a lot of them are older. So like they were always around. It was very much like my dad was really good at keeping the family together and like very much like was the matriarch that kept everyone coming around and he was the glue of the family, right? And so a lot of holidays we had lots of siblings around and lots of I mean they're all 20, 30 years older than me. So I think right now my oldest sibling is like 64 years old, right? And I'm 33. So what is that? He's 31 years older than me. So to say that I had a different experience than a lot of my friends, a lot of other people my age, is completely freaking true. Completely true. So my dad was 56, I believe, when whenever I was born. So
Let's pause for just a second. There is a lag, I'm now noticing.
yeah. So to go back to my experience growing up with an older parent. So my parents were 20 years apart. So my dad was born in 35 and mom was born in 55. So pretty big age gap. I think they met like my mom was 30 something, and he was 50 something. So, but yeah, growing up with an older parent, I didn't realize it was weird until I did, kind of thing, you know. It was just normal until like, and even like when people are in their 50s and 60s, he aged pretty well. He didn't really look like he was super old until he was in his 70s, I would say. But then like I started realizing like, oh wow, like all my buddies' parents are like not that old. Like this guy is definitely way older. And so yeah, I would say the difference was the difference wasn't realized until I was older in my years, right? But a lot of it was like I was raised like, if you think about it, half of me or half of my experience is, and maybe even more than half, just because of like the nature of the way that the family unit was created for his generation. So his generation was actually, I don't know like what the generation was because I think he was pre-baby boomer. 1935 is like pretty early on, you know?
Yeah.
So my mom could have been like his daughter, like she's 20 years younger than him, right? So for me to be my mom's daughter or my mom's son, is interesting
It's getting
because
weird here, man.
yeah, right. So it's interesting because I'm technically like two generations, maybe even in some realms, three generations away from my dad, meaning that whenever you look at generations of people and the way that they're raised and the way that like say like generation X and Y and whatever we want to call it, they're raised by the reason why they are dubbed that generation is not just because of the way that they were brought up in like a pop culture kind of like geopolitical norms sense. It also has everything to do with their parents and how their parents are raising those children.
Right.
So their parents' experience as children, generally, I would say that basically everybody in the world has some sort of trauma to do with their upbringing. And when they raise their children, they don't want it to be the same. And it's interesting to say that sometimes they end up being exactly the fucking same as their parents, and sometimes they end up being the exact opposite. So if you think about it in those terms, I am really just the opposite of my dad's upbringing from like the fucking 30s and 40s, right? And I'm also the opposite of my mom's upbringing of like the 60s and 70s, right? Or 50s and 60s, essentially. So I'm like a weird mutt of these two generations.
Yeah.
So I don't really fit into like a Gen Y or whatever. What is our generation? Do you know? Because you're born in 1994, I think, or 1993.
1991, but millennial regardless.
Oh, you're 1991. I
Yeah.
just think you're young. It's messed up. We can edit that out.
Don't show my age. Wait, what are you, 90, 93?
91. Yeah, 91.
Oh, you're 91?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, we're both 91. Yeah, okay.
that's right. So what is our generation? Do we have any idea?
We're millennials.
We're
Is it-
millennials.
yeah.
Okay,
I don't
so
know the exact cut. I think the exact cutoff is like 89 or 88 or something. I don't know. I know I'm a millennial. That's all I know.
okay, so we are millennials, but I like in a lot of ways I was raised as a millennial, but then in a lot of other ways I was raised with values and traditions and morals of a generation that would place me more in like a basically like in like the 60s to 70s era. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Although
You're like a boomer millennial.
yeah, it's very fucking
X or
weird.
whatever.
It's very fucking weird. Because like if I didn't hold a door open for a lady, I would literally get smacked. Like things like that. Or like I was taught that the dinner table is always to be set with like every setting. Like we set the dinner table every single night. We had dinner together every single night. The Simpsons was always on, mind you. But we always had dinner together. If we missed dinner, it basically meant you weren't going to eat maybe for that night and the morning after. I was taught to like, I had to like help the family business. There was no like, when I got done with school, I went home and like we were always, I mean, mostly me. I was a man of the house. I was the only boy. So yeah, I was always fixing my dad's computers and the fax machine and the modem. And I would build all of his offices. I would go with him to like summertime was not summer camp. Summertime was I went to work with my parents. And generally it was like, we weren't working in the field, but it was like I was going to help him measure up buildings. I was going to help him. He had me like fire contractors when I was like
Yeah.
14 years old, like weird stuff like that, where I'm like, I
Can
don't,
you imagine being fired by your boss's 14-year-old
and
son
like
for
not for not for nothing, but like my dad was like the architect of a job site, which is like very not the boss, right? So he would go in and he would just like take up the reins and just start like calling the shots on shit. He was just he loved that. He thought he was just in charge of everything. So he would go in there and he'd fire people that didn't work for him. It was crazy. And like half the time they listened to him, they're like, "Well, I guess I'm fired." I don't know who
I'm
that
out here.
was, but
Dude,
whatever.
we should do that more often. We should start going to job sites that we don't work at and firing people just to create
Yes.
some chaos.
See what happens. I'm like, this is really wild, right?
You're done for the day. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. Steve set me down here. He said you're done for the day, man. Sorry, go home.
So that's not gonna happen. No, no, you're out of here. You're out of here, Buster.
Yeah. Well, man, it's really interesting. Thanks for elaborating on that. I just think it's so interesting to think of like the things that you were taught your childhood, and then I mean, you mentioned you grew up. You know, you're going to get a smack in the back of the head for not holding a door open for a lady, and I totally hear that. But then we also now live in this world of, and it's not for the most part. I'll say really like I'm not going to let the internet paint how reality really is. For the most part, every woman is every person is grateful you hold the door open, but there is this like small percentage more and more of like I can hold the fucking door open for myself. Like I'm not some
Totally.
lady. Like treat me as a human, not a lady. Like there's kind of is a changing dichotomy. So it's interesting to think of like you were given these morals and values, but you're also around people who are similar to our age that, and a little younger than us, are the generation under us more and more. Is not used to those traditional values. Like sometimes those traditional values, they come from a place of being sweet and kind and like helpful, but they're almost offensive now to some. Like the same act could be somewhat offensive. So I don't know. I think I wanted to relate it back to like what you were talking about earlier about you don't have kids, you don't have like your responsibilities, quote unquote, are kind of like they can be self-centered. Like you're kind of responsible for yourself, and that's about it. And I think about that a lot too. Is like I'm at a point where like I want kids and I want a wife and these things. Like I want something to like push behind me and like remind me that I need to not focus on my dang self so often, or like these things that I want to do and what I think is important. And so I almost want the responsibilities to like take my hands off the reins. And so like I just do what I know I need to do rather than what I want to do, sometimes. So anyway, I don't know if that sparks anything for you,
Problems.
Cam.
We can make all kinds of problems for ourselves that like the reality is that like all of our problems are relative to like all of our other problems.
Right.
So it's like the problem of like, oh, I woke up and I expected it to be a rainy day and now it's too hot and I don't want to read a book now. It's like that's not a problem if like your child has colic and you stayed up for the last 3 days and your wife is like ready to leave you because she's like, I don't think I can handle this and we can't pay our mortgage and now I can't even
Yeah.
sleep, work. It's like,
And I'm caring about the fourth draft of some poetry that I wrote. Like,
yeah,
problems are different.
it is wild. It's wild. Like even like the generations of trauma change throughout your experience. Like everyone's trauma is the worst thing that's ever happened to anyone is just as equal as the worst thing that's ever happened to anybody else. So like whether you're born in Compton and you learned that you only need to sell drugs and you were burned with cigarettes when you were a kid and like you dropped out of school at age 7 and you are just a gangster, right? And you have whatever trauma from that. If that is your trauma, or if you're Donald Trump's daughter and you got communicated from a family and you went from like having millions at your disposal to now you only have like hundreds of thousands at your disposal, your trauma is both equal. Unfortunately, for the rest of us to be like, that's bullshit, but it's still equal. You know what I mean? So like, yeah, I mean, your trauma of like not being able to finish that fourth paragraph or the fourth draft of that poem is just as bad as like your baby having colic and your wife wanting to leave you, you know,
Right.
as as far as like a day to day goes, I suppose.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I've seen for every listener who has a child and they're just yelling at their listening device right now, like how dare you compare me raising a child to you trying to finish a line of poetry. I hear for you. But yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
it really is like I feel like that's one of the more important things of it's so easy to like compare ourselves and make ourselves a victim, but like dude, that is a profound thing for everyone to learn is like the worst thing you've ever experienced is the worst thing you've ever experienced. The worst like the most pain that you've ever gone through, there's no reason to really compare it to the worst pain someone else has gone through. Like it's just different problems, you know, like my
Absolutely.
pain, my level 9 pain is me, you know, hungry when I was a teenager. Someone else's level 9 pain might be literally their Xbox being taken away. And I know that sounds so cheap, but like so I dated like I had the opportunity to date a girl who had a child recently. And like I had to learn a lot. Like I haven't spent a lot, you know, I have nieces and nephews, but I live far away. Like I don't really spend a ton of time with kids. And I got like it was I learned a lot in, you know, just those like 4 months of just watching her, you know, she wants, you know, a bottle of warm milk before bed and she doesn't get it. And so she starts to become like so stressed out and then she's screaming. And it's
Yeah,
unreasonable, right? Like me, you know, I have all these years of experience. Like I know it's not reasonable. Like the way for you to get that thing of milk is not to scream. I know that. But to her, dude, she's learning about being a human and learning about her emotions. It really is the end of the world for her at that moment. And it was
absolutely.
really cool for me to like you know, watch how like I want to control the situation. Like I, you know, I don't want her you know, I have a reaction, my body has a reaction to her yelling, her being uncomfortable or whatever, you know, but she's just a little girl. There's also this separate reaction of going like, oh yeah, she's just how I was when I was that age. She's learning what it is to like be without something that you want. And it like really sucks, doesn't it? And it takes you years to really go like, okay, I want that thing and I don't get it, and that's okay, you know. But the learning process of being a human, like you know, it's in stages, and it's all a different bag full of goodies that we're handed, and sometimes we can be still 25, 30 years old. And we're just still kind of pissed that we're not getting our warm milk before bed, and like it still hurts, you know. Like it's an act of learning to like be okay with these things.
Yeah.
And
And going like, let me ask you, like, for your experience, like as a child and growing up, because I'm sure that had to like made you think like just dealing with or just not even dealing with, but just being around and being subject to raising a child, you know? How much did that remind you of your experience as a child and like your own parenting? And was there anything that jumped out at you that was brought up in the sense of like, I definitely want to do this differently from my parents, or wow, now I kind of see that they were just humans too. You know, maybe this is, you know, I guess, was there anything that made you think back to your experience as a child and that would shape the way that you view parenting or ideal parenting in your own shoes?
I feel like you need to start your own podcast. This is such a good question. I was like, all of your questions have been so good so far, man. I feel like all of our conversations, you always have good questions, bro. Thank you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate
How
that.
should, yeah, you know, it's interesting. So I feel like when I reflect back on my childhood, a thing that was really loud to me, and this is something that's common with the personality types, like the MBTI, INFJs. That's what I am, as an INFJ. Um,
Can
I
we
always
I'm not gonna stop you now, but can we link to that later? I'd or talk about that later.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah. I'll send you the thing. I'll include it for anybody listening. If you want to check that out, if you've never done your personality type, I'll put a link to the one I like in the description as well.
awesome.
Um,
Sorry to cut you
yeah.
off.
So a commonality, like you can go on the Reddit subreddit, and it'll be a common thing. When I was younger, I kind of had this awareness of like, yes, I'm a part of the family, but I'm also watching the family. I feel like I was like, you know, we're all sitting in the living room watching The Simpsons, we're watching TV, but I also had an awareness of I'm watching the family watch the TV, and it after a while I started to realize that like not everyone around me had that sort of like sense of things. And So something that gets me and something that stands out to me is when we do things, and we all do it, so this specific example, the girl that I was dating for a while, her child was, around 3 or 4. And what you do when a child is in the room is you're talking about adult things, and you say her, she wants this. Like, you're talking about this child who's right here. And what's something that was really loud to me is, like, when I was younger, I was really aware of those conversations, and I would always be like, why are they talking like I'm not right here? Like, it was always really confusing. Like, we're having
Yeah,
this whole
that's
separate storyline about me when I'm not right here. Like, it was really confusing for me to continuously extrapolate outside of what we're actually doing and talk about what we're doing as if I'm not there. But then in the next instant, I need to be paying attention to what you say to me about me. This is about, I need to follow directions. Like, what, that was a very confusing thing. And so I think that I tried to, I'm sure I probably failed at this, but with this girl that I was dating, I tried to, like, include her daughter on everything that was happening, whatever I was doing, even if it's an adult conversation that she doesn't know what I'm talking about. I'm still going to explain it to her. I feel like I don't think she has to understand all the words that I'm saying, or, like, I don't have to answer the whys of everything. Like, she's still even learning how to communicate herself and put words together and speak. But I felt that, like, just saying what I'm doing out loud, including her, made this we situation, that I don't know. I guess that was something that was really loud to me, was the
absolutely.
separateness when I was younger. It really, really threw me off. I didn't get why people did that. It was really confusing. And I don't think that they got why they did it. A lot of times I'm like, are you people even aware that you're doing this? Like, in the answer is no.
Completely. But since, I mean, that to me, the immediate reaction that I have when you saying that is like you were forced to grow faster, to grow up quicker than maybe other kids around you, like in whatever way, for whatever reason. And I feel the same way about that. I feel completely the same way about that. There's something that triggers you to just have to, like, take on responsibility in an age that you wouldn't think you'd have to, right? And, like, in doing that, I think that parents inherently, the child is a burden on them. Like, they don't know how much responsibility they are. They just know that, like, they are they're just a child, right?
Right.
And parents have to view children as, at least from my experience, they have to view children as like as a burden, as something that they are responsible for. And so, like, talking to them about them in front of them is very much like, yeah, we want to include them, but also, like, we don't have fucking time for that bullshit. We don't fucking figure out how we're gonna feed this little bastard, Like,
Yeah.
how are we gonna feed it? We don't know what it wants. We don't care what it wants. We don't need it to be a part of this conversation because it's not gonna be able to work and bring home the money. It's
Yeah.
so interesting to think like that. And I wonder, like, talking back to, like, the generational differences in, like, parenting, we're very much a lot of our peers are very much a product of, like, the oh god, what do you call it? The trophy for showing up generation, the participation award generation, right? We got pat on the backs because we showed up, and we are very, like, coddled in a lot of ways. And you kind of still see a lot of that. We're also the generation of, like, people getting canceled because they got recorded smacking their baby in a Walmart, right? And at the end of the day, I don't have kids. I don't know what it's like to raise kids, but I can tell you right now, maybe sometimes your baby needs to be smacked. I don't know.
I'm sure the urge
Doing
is
it in a
there to smack
Walmart
your
in
baby.
front of everybody, yeah, doing it in a Walmart in front of everybody, maybe that's not the way to do it.
Yeah.
But everyone, like, nobody wants to go and make their child into, like, the traumatic version of their own childhood.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes to being a parent, there is these, it's funny. I just mentioned, like, there's these two separatenesses that are confusing for a child, of, like, these realities of, you know, like, we're watching TV, but I'm also watching us watch TV. There's kind of, like, these separate. So the kid, as much as truth is one of the most important things, and it really needs to be, like, the fulcrum of how you raise anybody, let alone an adult raising a kid. There's a level where my kid doesn't need to know that every bite of food he eats gives me stress about paying bills that month. Something that I think, we've talked a little bit about trauma, like we all have our own trauma, something that my parents did that affected me later on. Um, and again, like I love my mom and dad very much. Like we've worked through a lot of these things, and I'm not saying this to like hold anything over of them. They're wonderful people and they're very self-reflective about these things now too. But so like I was a condom ripping baby. So I was an accident. And like my
Mhm.
mom in her young, unaware state, she's early 20s, like mid 20s, whatever. She would constantly say things like, "You were an accident, baby. You were an accident. We didn't want you. We didn't plan to have you." And so I internalized these things that like now I still deal with self-worth issues, and like being a burden on people is huge. I grew up my teenage years. Um, I would like live with friends for a few times during the week, and I was always very aware, like I'm another mouth to feed. Like I didn't earn this food, but they're paying their own money and feeding me, and I was always really aware of being a burden on people. Um, I think there's a way now that we would realize of being parents where it's not that I need to lie to my kid and tell him, "Hey, we're rich. Like we've got like I know you don't see a pool in the backyard, but like pretend that you see a pool in the backyard." Like so you're not lying to your kid, but there's a way of I don't need to know that we're kind of struggling to pay the electricity bill. Like when I'm 6 years old, I don't need to know about the bills. So I think there's a level of being truthful with your kid, but also creating this world where they can play. I think a good parent successfully does this. And again, if don't beat yourself up if you're not successfully doing this. I know it must be more difficult than I could put into words, but like there's a way that your child needs to have this illusion of them just exploring the world. Like you need to, until they're 18, they need to not even know about bills as far as I'm concerned. They need to not know about the electricity. They don't need to think that they were an accident in any sort of way. That's why, man, I don't know how people raise a kid or have a marriage without God. I mean, and I'm not trying to like say a deity, or I'm not trying to strike just Christianity or anything, but like things like
Totally.
faith and trust and like knowing that everything's going to be okay. Like those things, I don't really know. How do you contact those very important things of like, just living a human life, let alone raising a young adult to have standards and values and, a successful life when they're on their own. I don't know how
Absolutely.
you tune into those things without some form of God or higher power. So it's just some sort of system, you know?
It's interesting that you bring it up because it's something that we have both talked about, like on our walks. Like one of the last walk runs that we did, we talked about what it would be like to have like a spiritual type of like conversation or a group, like somewhat of a men's group, somewhat of a something to connect with each other and to talk about these concepts and what they mean. Something that like I think the way I phrased it or the way that I personally view it is I don't currently have any sort of belief system into like into a traditional religion, I would say. And so for me, it's like I've always wondered, like not always, but the question of like code, like a moral code, has always been something that I ponder. And even like a lot of times in my journal, I try to like I like simple things. I like just simple words to describe a code. I don't want to have like long paragraphs and like I don't want like a whole like constitution for how I want to live my life, but more of just like if I can narrow it down into like something that I could say in less than 10 words. And I think some of the things that I write down in the mornings, the current ones that I've decided are the closest thing to a moral code that I personally have is like courage, acceptance, love, patience, truth and or honesty. Um, and I think there's one more, but that's the gist of it right
Mm.
there. And by not having any sort of community or even like organization that reinforces those things, specifically through like parable, through like written word, whatever you want to call it, through like agreements on on these concepts and what they mean for all of us and how they always change, specifically through life. Like I'm imagining myself back in Catholic church as a child, like listening to the parables and most of the time not paying attention, but every once in a while something grabbing me and being like, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense. And I do actually believe that, you should be good to your neighbor, things like that. You shouldn't help out someone in need, or, oh, this guy's tire is flat on the side of the road. Why wouldn't I take the time to stop and help him? Like I really don't have anywhere to be that bad.
Mm.
So I didn't silence my phone. But the thought of not having something like that, particularly when raising a family, is it's something that I've always said. I've always said if I have kids, I'm gonna take them. I'm gonna go to church.
Right.
I don't know where. I don't know what church.
Yeah.
But I was like, I've always said, like, there's so much to be said about having a community that all believes in like similar values, that gets together regularly, that talks openly, that has trust in each other, that ideally you would like have some donuts with, because who doesn't want donuts on a Sunday? Like all of those things. I remember going to church and like liking a lot of those things about it, but being raised Catholic, I specifically remember the day that I looked around and everybody was like singing in hymns and whatnot. And I was just really turned off. I was very like, something about it just made me realize we're all just followers. Nobody there is a leader. And we're all following something that I didn't actually believe, because I was like, at that point, I hadn't read the Bible, but I had listened to enough of it to know that it wasn't, realistic. And so in my head, I was like, okay, well, why are we all just blatantly following this thing and nobody's really asking questions, at least the questions that I think are important? And if we do ask those questions, they're pretty much answered like non-answers, So I think that it would be a lot easier to swallow the concept of spirituality and religion in general, if there were solutions to those questions that I'm posing right now,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of those, you hear the term baby, throwing out the baby with the bathwater. You hear that when it comes to religion and God and spirituality. And I think that is really like a big core of what goes on there is, dudes like us have those experiences where you look around and you're like, oh, I don't like, there was parts of this that I resonated with, but like overall, you guys are having a different experience than me here. Like, I don't know. I wish that I could believe everything y'all are apparently believing, but I don't. So what do I do with that? I had times when I was young where uh, I wasn't like raised in like a Christian background or anything. I feel like my parents were probably more apt to like poke fun at it more than anything. There wasn't really much. Now my parents would say probably they claim more of like my mom's side would claim more of like a pagan version of spirituality. But there was times where I went and I would go with like a girlfriend or something, girlfriend's family, and I would leave going, okay, well, I'm burning in hell according to these people. Like I'm fucked. Like I would leave just not feeling good about anything and going, according to these people, I am like I might as well set myself on fire right now because that's where I'm heading. And so that didn't give me any of the answers that I looked for. But I also had these very it was just like a common response to anything to do with religion or spirituality. Like I just had like such a reaction to it of, when I hear words like faith or trust or whatever, I have all these preconceived ideas and all these like I don't even let those words in. When
the word God is so scary to so many people.
Yeah.
So
our bodies just tense up. Like, oh, don't you tell me about a giant man in the clouds. Like, don't you talk about this deity, but I think, if we give ourselves, if we let ourselves really explore what that stuff means for us personally, and I don't even mean like us personally in a conversation with a pastor, if that's how you get there, that's cool. But like us personally, as in you read this, you're by yourself in your room and you read this stuff. Like, what does it really feel like within you? Like, what does it really mean to you? I think we should all be given permission and the tools and the amplification from one another to explore spirituality as individuals. Like being a human, we all like there's 8 billion humans. Each of us should have our own relationship, individual relationship with God or a Jesus or a Buddha or an avatar, whatever it is. Like, there's layers, not to deity, not to just make things a deity, but we have like a language. There's pathways in our brain. There's, you've heard the term God-size hole. There's something within us of being a human in the human psyche that has room, the puzzle pieces for like God and spirit and the soul. And like, yeah, you're a part of this family and you work at a grocery store and your employee badge says Frank, but also you're at one with everything, like there's paradoxically room for all of it, and we should all. I'm getting on such a rambling side sprint. I'm sorry, Cam,
I
but
love it. I love it. Yeah.
but yeah, I think there's a lot of baby with the bathwater that happens there, and I hope dudes like us, like dudes our age, having more of these public conversations, kind of points things within each other of like, man, if the people around you or the way that you learned about these things didn't work for you, or you're in these rooms looking around going, oh, I'm not resonating with what you guys are resonating with. That doesn't mean dump the word God and never look it up again, or slam the Bible shut and never open it. I think it means you've now been invited on a self-exploration journey that maybe none of these people have the answer for you. And maybe the answer is, this is a door that opens from the inside, So we should all, we all have that. It's part of being a human. We all have a spiritual journey, and nobody tells us what that looks like. That's all for our own selves to experience.
And it does bring me back to us talking about like a format of conversation, that Austin is such a hotbed of new psychology these days. Austin's such a hotbed of like new ideas taking hold and like openness to them, and people just very, very interested in what all these other super fucking interesting people are doing in their city. I think, honestly, after traveling around so much, I honestly see Austin being the next San Francisco, but not the next Silicon Valley, but not for tech. The next LA, but not just for fashion and culture. Next New York, but not just for art.
There's like a philosophical, spiritual aspect to it.
There's something here that is not, and I'm not even there. I'm in Moab, and I can feel it just in our conversation. It's rad. There's something there that is just, it just draws people in. Like, I've listened to a couple podcasts the last few days, and like Brene Brown lives in freaking Austin. Like,
oh, she does? I didn't know that.
Of course. Yes, very cool. Very cool. I sent you that podcast the other day about those guys that were talking about like anthropology, and kind of like, I would say there's some geopolitics mixed in, but both of them were like history and or anthropology guys that were talking about like how America could be like 11 different countries based on like culture and based on history, and why they moved, why different religions and different people moved into different places. And both of them singled out Austin, and both of them, they both live in Texas. One of them both definitely lives in Austin. And both of them singled out Texas as basically being able to be its own country, because it's not similar to any of these other like 11 colony countries that they were talking about, for a lot of reasons. And specifically Austin. As much as they talked about like LA and New York being its own type of like culture and its own city, and something that you would almost consider like Paris, France as its own city, and like even like or like Munich, Germany, how like those two places are not really like any other place in the world. Tokyo. Obviously, I would put New York in there. I would definitely put LA in there. And these guys are saying that Austin is right in there with them. Same as Miami. Those like they are not like any other place in the world. And to say that like there's not the interesting thing about this podcast was talking about how they don't see a lot of like Americans and Westerners taking hold of their own culture, taking like pride in their culture. Texas is a outlier in that. Texas culture and Texas pride is a big deal. Now, as much as I love the state of Texas, I say that I'm from Austin when I go places. I love being a Texan. I love having pride in being a Texan. but I take even more pride in being from Austin. And
Yeah, I say
there's
the same
something
thing. I don't ever
about
say
it.
Texas. I say
No,
Austin specifically.
yes, because and there are people flocking here from all over the world, and it's not just because it's cool. Originally, I thought it was just because it's cool. So much more than that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm so curious to see where it goes. I
Well,
like even to the extent, like it's almost like how these Mormons call Salt Lake and Utah their Zion. Like there's something about Austin that is like I don't want to like that's kind of a crazy relation there, but there is something about it that the new age of um like kind of like a lesser ego and like a more I don't know, man. There's a friendliness to Austin that LA and New York don't have. There's a pride and a proudness of it that like the Midwest doesn't have. There's a like love thy neighbor aspect to it that really nowhere else in the country has. That's
yeah.
very technical. And there's something very open to new ideas the rest of Texas and a lot of the basically everything east of the Mississippi doesn't have.
Yeah.
I think that we are a very cool conglomerate of all these things together. And I am personally incredibly excited to see where it goes. Um,
Yeah. I think I was just thinking to add to that, I think something that I was drawn to is kind of like the punk rockness, which also I think if you want to interlay the word punk rock with cowboy, I think that actually makes a lot of sense. Like cowboys are punk rock as hell. Like they're doing it their own way. They're making the path. They're like, oh, there's no trail here. I'm gonna fucking make the trail myself. The cowboy punk rock is I was really drawn towards that, and I also was thinking at the beginning of a conversation, Cam, we were mentioning Travis Pastrana. He did the first backflip on a motocross on an MX bike. I think there's something about Austin that like there's a lot of edge pushers here, like the edge. All the comedians who are moving here, which is that's a whole nother chapter of like funny philosophy, and we need comedians. Like they're actually very important. I don't want to
Absolutely.
pontificate comedians that it can get so dorky, but really this turning into like the comedy hub of the world, of the free speech kind of hub of the world. Again, all this sounds so dorky to name, but there is something about like people across the US are looking at Austin and like we keep breaking the 4 minute mile and people are like, dude, I need to go there and like break my 4 minute mile, And I think me as a creator, I don't really know. It's hard for me I've been almost 5 years here. It's hard for me to put my finger on exactly, but I was drawn to that. Like there is some sort of at the edge of, like I said, being a poet, being an artist, being a musician. I want to push the edges of what it means to be just a human, a person. And it feels like this is a playground for that. There's people to my left and right. In every yoga class I go to, there's someone who is also just exploring the depths of their consciousness. All the stagehands I work with, like, they're out here making $20 an hour and eating garbage food, but they're also like, if I listen to their album they just put out yesterday, they're a brilliant musician. There's all these people who are just pushing the boundaries of what they're doing. It,
I'll add that you have that in other places, but there's not like that. You have that. The thought of like Denver is kind of this funny place where everybody goes to find themselves, right? But it's very cold. It's a very cold community. Like Denver is not open to me. To me, it's not very open. It's not very friendly. It's very like in a lot of ways, it's kind of fake. Austin doesn't feel that way. Austin feels warm and welcoming,
yeah,
and very much you feel like you're a part of it. You don't feel like you're surrounding the outside of it. You don't feel like you're an afterthought or even just like you don't really feel like you're an outcast. It feels like everyone can be a part of something here. I love that about it. I love that you can feel like you are in the community. And maybe I am biased because I'm from there pretty much. I've been there since I was, 5, 6 years old. But even when I leave and come back, it takes me like a day or two to like re-find it, but I'm immediately re-immersed in what feels so real and so friendly.
mm.
I love it.
Well, I mean, I was very like how we met. We met through Float On. You were working at Float On, and I mean, I felt instantly part of the community there. I mean, you definitely had a hand in that. Just it's a gift you have. Earlier we were talking about our different gifts. You know, a mother shows up as a mother so well. Like yours is, we've spoken about this off camera, but like yours, part of yours is definitely bringing people together. The community aspect is part of you, making people feel comfortable and welcome. And you're
Thank you.
really good at like bringing out the best in people and then bringing them all into one place. And then like I feel like I picture you put your hands on your hips and like, all right, go. I know you're all awesome. Run with it, you know, like you have that skill. And so I got to experience that too. But so this is something we've talked to. We're getting a little bit up here in time, Cam, but I think it'd be cool to kind of roundabout on this community thing. You know, we're both in Austin. We're both, you know, we're born in 91. We're around the same age. We've talked about this a few times. Like we've met up doing like kind of running club things. We've both agreed, man,
I
there's a need for
miss
this.
them terribly.
Yeah, I know. I can't wait. Yeah, can't wait to get back. We're gonna have to hit it again. But I don't know. I think putting our money where our mouth is. You know, I've talked. I'm really I got my mindfulness meditation teacher certification. I want to do something with it if I can be useful. I
Absolutely.
want, you know, I want the puppet of the universe to put his hand up my butt and use me as a puppet. You know, use me for good. So I want to try to contribute to this community. So I guess I think it'd be cool to end this, Cam, with like a brainstorm of how do we use this awesomeness of Austin and this presentness of us being dudes without, you know, we specifically don't have kids. We're looking for meaning. We know the spiritual stuff is helpful. We know like mindfulness meditation, all that sort of stuff is helpful. We feel better when we link up with people and do physical activity or make friend groups or communities. Do we start doing a once a week thing? Do we do a Zoom call? Do we meet up twice a week to go running? Like, how do we make action out of our ideas and capitalize on the momentum of like this community thing trying to be built through us? Like, how do we not stop it? How do we add to this thing trying to, you know, grow through us?
Absolutely. I mean, I will obviously I will address my main drawback, which is my location. Is I'm just not there for a while, which is the biggest bummer because ideally I would say we just go start a meetup and just start doing something where we get a few people together and have like somewhat of a spiritual conversation over a walk with like a sit afterwards. And what I was imagining earlier when talking about uh, religion and like a moral code and things like that, like what it means to me. I basically imagine like somewhat of a leaderless, like AA format of, you know, we're not necessarily trying to heal any specific trauma. We're not trying to like keep anybody from jumping off a bridge. There's other resources for that, but I think it's more of how do you intentionally want to positively move forward with your life?
Mm,
And how can we all share in ways that we want to do that? And how can we all share in the reasons why we find ourselves here? How can we all share in like our beliefs of how we want to live our day to day? Because if that was like a weekly reminder to me, if there was something that I was able to look into my own perspective, and like I think both of us are great storytellers. I think you're an excellent storyteller. I mean, one of your greatest gifts and greatest traits is being able to get other people to tell stories too. And I think that I am super um, open to sharing and open to telling my stories. And I even like hold myself to a higher standard of telling them because when I'm around you, I feel that. I feel like I'm lifted up by your company in that way. So I think if people are we find folks that are interested in that, folks that are interested in sharing and why they want to be a part of something and we can share ourselves and the thought of taking a walk around the lake and having a few people in on that, or even having like individual groups, like you break people up if it's big enough, and you say you guys go over here and you'll go over here and we go over here and whatever. And say if you have like I don't know, like think of like a child's care, like a kids care facility, like 1 to 7, 1 to 8, something like that for everybody that does it. I guess that's kind of like bigger picture, but ideally having like a regular weekly meetup where we go for a walk and then afterwards like have a talk and just talk about like what life is and what life has been and where we're at and why we feel the way we do.
Yeah.
Um, in my head, that sounds like a great idea. Maybe we just try it and see what happens.
Yeah, dude, I think it's yeah, it
What do you
sounds
think?
so yeah, like and it really doesn't have to be super structured. I feel like we successfully just by talking about the things we're inevitably interested in and want to talk about. I mean, like you said, I feel like every time we meet up, we end up in the spiritual realm of conversation. It's just what's fun, it's what's adventurous and what's right there. It's right there on the surface to be plucked out. There's this term, and I kept hearing it in my head as you were talking, creating a container. And like
Yeah,
it sounds kind of cheap, but it is perfect. Like, how could we create a container once a week? It's nothing too crazy. You don't have to sign anywhere. You don't have to do an NDA. Like, you could be anybody. You could be going through anything. You don't have to wear anything or rep us or whatever. Like, it's just we're gonna be here at this time talking about this stuff. Come on in. Like
absolutely, absolutely. And it's interesting because we talked about. I wondered if there's anything else out there. I saw it on Instagram the other day. It looked super cheesy, but maybe that's just what this is. And it was something like called like meditation bros or meditation dude. You know what I'm talking about? Have you seen this?
no,
It's
but
like,
I
it's
yeah.
probably specifically targeted to me because of our conversations, I'm sure. But it was like an Instagram advertisement of like, sign up and come and join us. We're a bunch of bros that like to get together and like
Yeah.
meditate, talk about life and shit. And
Well, clearly bros are desperate for this stuff, man. I mean, let's
absolutely,
be honest. Like
absolutely.
there's a lot of people who are not even just males, but like, dude, a lot of us are lonely as all fuck. We're
Yeah, a lot of us
connected as
humans, a lot
yeah,
of us,
man. We're just looking for something real too, I mean, we're entrenched in reality TV versions of everything that's going on, whether it's politics or, the geopolitical shit or just entertainment in general, the actual reality TV, it's like everything is Kardashianified. And so for us to link up and be able to set our armor down without the judgment and just like, hey man, I'm having a human experience. Aren't you? And the other person's like, yeah, dude. Like that's what we need.
yeah.
Me too.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there's something to be said about um, having like a premise of why you get together, and I don't know what exactly a premise could be, but whether it's just connection, because I can tell you right now, starting my day with this conversation with you is going to set me off on a trajectory that's going to be different than yesterday. Just being able to share with you and be able to connect with you on such a level is going to make me just feel good all day long. It's like
Mhm.
we are connecting. We're connected individuals. We seek connection. We love to connect. Something about like
We are.
laughter. Like laughter is not for yourself. Like laughter is for connection, right?
Yeah.
And we love it. It makes you feel good. So like, why wouldn't you do it? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I wonder like how much we could take that into it and say, how well can we just connect with one another? What if it is literally just like we get together and we sit around and we talk to each other, and that's what we do. It's like
Right.
we have like a one-on-one like setting of like, you just have conversations with people and connect, and then you share about what do you think, what are you thinking right now, and you share with like in a group setting. It's like you go from a one-on-one to a group and then just see where it goes.
Yeah. I mean, there's a saying in the meditative world, yoga specifically, namaste. You've heard that. And it means the light in me sees and honors the light in you. And I think that by us creating containers or holding space, and just sharing like what's going on within us or like, hey, here's some things I'm going through. Suddenly it shines a light or allows space for the light of someone else to take the stage. Like suddenly, someone might show up. They were not even thinking about these things. They were not planning on talking about them. But like here I am sharing about my childhood trauma. And suddenly they're like, they feel okay to talk about theirs. And suddenly they
Totally.
just like process something they did not even realize they wanted to process, needed to process, but there was room for it. And so they showed up and suddenly now that thing that maybe has been plaguing them for 20 years has just been vocalized and their body feels a little bit lighter. So I think the light in me loves and gives permission to the light in you, whatever it is. Yeah, just by showing up and living authentically or living truthfully or just sharing what the hell we're going through as a human. it opens the space for the other people around, it really does.
Yes, dude, I just had a rad idea.
Yeah.
Okay, what about this? Here's like another like it's just like a taper off of this, I guess, or like a sidearm. What if specifically because you and I are both in the event industry where like we can find ourselves in other places and wondering like where we fit in, what we're doing, whatever. What if we had some sort of meetup that was like for that reason? Like the thought of having something where it's like we almost like aren't even dependent or don't even really care how local you are. We're specifically targeting like you aren't local, or you're just here for a day, or you're in the event business, or you're here for a week, or you're a traveling nurse and you don't have anybody, or whatever it is.
Yo,
What if
this
we
is so good. I love this.
were specifically angling towards like people that just don't have anybody to connect to, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
How cool would that be? It's like you find a way to like bridge connections with people that like we have been in that like it's coming from a place of servitude where like you and I have both been in another place, like me right now in this strange land where I don't know anybody here. And my connection, like my day is going to change because of connection I'm having with you right now. How
Yeah.
much do you do that on like a weekly basis with like other people in the city, people that just they don't have anybody to connect with and they don't have any they don't have any friends or whatever it is. And you just start with that. Like, how cool would that be to say, this is like we're benefiting, we're trying to like serve from a place that we've all been at before.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard this term this morning. The room is not the room. It just makes me think of like, uh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to sew too many things into this, but like, yeah, like a community without a place, like a floating community. Like the community is like we're creating an in-person community, but we all travel. So like the meeting spot's never the same. The time and space is never the same, but like we all travel and we create this space when we decide we all have this thing we want to accomplish together, and we meet up and suddenly that thing is sprouted. I mean, it makes me think of like, dude, because I travel a lot too for work, and in the event industry, the way to connect is drinking. Unfortunately, that's like it's a big part of our in the event world. Sometimes more than less. And I'm not just saying like it's a bunch of alcoholics or anything, but it really is like, man, after you work 18-hour days, it's nice to have a beer, and I haven't drank for a couple of years myself, but like there is instances of that, just shedding the day and being able to just BS with your coworkers about whatever went on that day, or even not even talk about work and just bond and complain or whatever it is with the people you're traveling with, or at a hotel bar or whatever it is nice. But you like me, I don't drink anymore, and so I avoid those areas. Like I don't even want to go have fries and a burger or whatever. Like I just don't even want to be around it. I end up just putting headphones on and having like a spiritual practice to recharge on my own. But if there's a container we could create, or encourage other people to create on their own too, of a place to meet up that's not just drinking when you're traveling, I think
I think
inevitably it'll be spiritual.
I think it'd be rad, man. And what if it is something like in this format too? What if it is some sort of it could be a wow, it could be like a Zoom format. It could be a like a digital format as well. I guess it doesn't have to be in person, even just for you and I, and for anyone else in the same position. I don't know how that would look or how that would work, especially just because of time schedules and things like that. But
Yeah.
that's another thing to look at too. So
I mean, I think putting a best foot forward to making it happen, not saying like, hey, we're going to start this, and now going forward every Sunday at 2 p.m. we do this. Like, we don't have access to that right now. But I think leaving this conversation with the intention of trying to sprout that, and then going forward, I think I would just like to, even with my recent meditation teacher certification stuff, I would like to, not that I want to like lead all of these things all the time. Like I think there's a way for me to maybe connect us. Maybe I could guide us through a quick little meditation. Then I would love to like just be another person and not, I'm not fully prepared to start my cult at this time. I have a lot of paperwork to do before I start a cult. So
same.
uh,
Great.
But yeah, I love this, man. I think that's so cool. I think there's a lot of room for this, and I think we'll probably find that there'll be some fellas and ladies alike listening to this part of the podcast that will be like, hell yeah, that sounds really cool. So we should dive more into this, man.
100%, 100%. Rad. I do need to go, and I think that we are at time pretty much, but I have so many more ideas now than I had an hour ago, and so yeah, I'll be calling you later on.
Yeah, that sounds good too. Well, man, we'll have to do podcasts more often. Like I said, I love talking to you. It's always a pleasure, man. So anytime you have like a wellspring of ideas that you want to get out to the world, hit me up and we'll schedule a podcast, man. I always love talking to you.
Absolutely. I would love to as well.
Yeah, Kim, thank you so much, man. Thank you for doing this. We've been talking about getting a podcast on
Of
for a
course.
while. There will be many more, I'm sure. Thank you for allowing the free flow, just hang out part of things. Like it was very fulfilling to me. It was so fun hanging out with you.
Man, I am so grateful that you even asked me to do it. I feel embarrassed to say that I hadn't even really looked at your podcast until like last night. And I started looking, I was like, oh my God, he's got like over 100 episodes. He's got a bunch of people on here. I was like, I feel so grateful to be even asked for this, you know? I really, really appreciate it. And it's given me an outlet to share in this morning that I never would have thought of. Yeah, man, I love the connection that you and I share. And I love the ideas that we can both just kind of like freebase and just not have to worry about where they go. It's very enlightening to know that we haven't known each other for that long, and the connection that we have is pretty rad. So yeah, great stuff, man. And yeah, I'd love to share some more ideas with you later on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, I'm grateful for our connection and how we met, and really like the whole community of homies around you that I've got to like meet and interact with, and it's made my time in Austin incredibly valuable. So I'm grateful for your friendship, man. This was really cool.
Hell yeah. Well, I appreciate everything, Jacob.
Yeah, well, listeners, you know the drill. If you haven't drank any water at this point in your day, what are you doing, dude? Drink some water, get hydrated. If you haven't stretched today, stretch out, move around, move that fascia, get movement, get outside if you haven't gotten outside. Love yourself. If you want to hear more from Cam, comment below. Cam, if you'd like, I can include your Instagram and whatnot in the description. Reach out to Cam for questions, and yeah, I guess we'll see you next time.
That'd be rad. Hey, do me a favor and link that personality test in there, because I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Everybody look below. I think it'll be the MBTI. I think that's what it's for. But regardless, yeah, it's like the INFJ, ENFP, whatever. It's valuable. When I first learned about, I'm just continually going, I'm sorry. When I first learned about it, it was like a pretty much brought me to tears moment for me personally, because I'm someone who like deeply wants to understand himself. And when I read the synopsis, like took the test a couple times, it gave me the thing. Here's what you are. Here's how you think. Bro, for me, when I was reading it, it was like deeply moving. I was like, I've never felt so seen by any text before this moment. So anyway, I'll include that. Check it out. Do the thing below. And Cam, I love you, buddy. We'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Love you too, buddy. Have a rad day.
Later, brother. Knowledge is power.
Reality is